It lingered there to touch your hair and walk with me. All summer long we sang a song, then we strolled that golden sand. Two sweethearts and the summer wind. Like painted kites, those days and nights went flying by. The world was new beneath the blue umbrella sky. Then softer than a piper man, one day it called to you. But still the days, those lonely days go on and on.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Once you've got your coffee, please make your way from the networking marquee into the main marquee as we will get underway in the next few minutes with this morning's plenary session. Thank you.
My fickle friend, the summer wind. Ooh, that summer wind. Warm, warm summer wind. That summer wind.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin this morning, can the owner of a black BMW 181D 28672 please return to the events garden? You have left your engine and lights on. Thank you.
Me and Mrs. Jones, we got a thing going on. We both know that it's wrong, but it's much too strong to let it go now. We meet every day at the same cafe, 6:30, and no one knows she'll be there, holding hands, making all kinds of plans, while the jukebox plays our favorite song. Yeah, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jones, we got a thing going on. 'cause I know that it's wrong, but it's much too strong to let it go now. We gotta be extra careful that we don't build our hopes up too high.
Wow, the best laid plans of mice and men, they say. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Reese Smith, Chargé d'Affaires, and the entire U.S. Embassy here in Dublin, I want to welcome you to the 2018 U.S. Embassy Economic Conference, Racing Toward a Trillion, the Future of U.S.-Irish Business. Without further ado, I'd like to bring to the stage your host for today's event, Mr. Reese Smith, Chargé d'Affaires.
Thank you, Mark. Ahishi, ahahirli, agus agwini ushla, tofacha roiv, gaji parkan inishka, don okad, yalagrok sha inu. Ismor on honor lauert live our magin. Baniji salt asonla. Tish. So for you non-Irish speakers, Taoiseach, Chairman Hassett, distinguished guests, welcome to Phoenix Park for our economic conference. It is my great honor to address you today, and I really hope you enjoy the day. The United States and Ireland are racing towards $1 trillion. Today, we have some of the leading minds from Ireland and the United States who will analyze strategies on how we can overcome the obstacles and capitalize on all the opportunities to reach this goal. $1 trillion economic relationship between a country the size of Ireland with the United States is phenomenal. And we are roughly at $720 billion currently is our estimate, which is still a good distance from $1 trillion. So how are we going to get there? How do we get to that magic $1 trillion relationship? What are the things that we need to do? And this is really quite an amazing statistic when you think where both of our countries were 10 years ago after a devastating financial crisis for both of our nations and where we are now, and where this really speaks volumes to the bonds between our two countries. You know, not only the historic and cultural bonds, but now the economic and business bonds between our two countries. A theme of today is we succeed together. Really, no one country, no one company. It is not a solo effort to reach $1 trillion goal. This is a marathon. It's a team event. It depends on government, business, entrepreneurs, helping to inspire and work together. What we're about today is looking at the future of the Irish-American relationship. We are going to have breakout sessions where we can explore taxation and investment to see how we can run this race faster, because really those are the fuel that will really power this relationship. Also, we're going to look at some of the controversial topics. We're going to look at Brexit. We're going to look at cybersecurity. These are potential obstacles that could be in our way. As Ireland handles the Brexit challenge, really the economic relationship with the United States, I think, becomes even more and more important. But I'll be very interested to hear the discussions when we get an American view on Brexit in that panel discussion. Cybersecurity is a threat to all of us. It's a threat to our businesses. It's a threat to our governments. It's a threat to our own privacy. I mean, this is something that could really devastate an economy or even our way of life. And so the threats there are enormous. So be very interested to hear the discussion going on there. And the presentation in the plenary on artificial intelligence, really, it's creating opportunities that previously didn't exist. So it should be very exciting. And then I'm really looking forward to former Ryder Cup captain Paul McGinley. I think he's a very entertaining speaker, and that should be a good way to end it all with a nice lunch. We have an impressive lineup. I have been spending the past couple days with Chairman Hassett, and I feel like my brain has actually just gotten a little bigger after all those meetings. It has been fascinating. We've had such great meetings. Just a few minutes ago with the Taoiseach himself, but with the finance minister, with the central bank and others. And really, it's just amazing to see the common ground between the U.S. policy and Ireland. I think, as we start to build and move forward as to how we're going to work together. So happy to have him here. And if you haven't checked out his great interview in The Independent, check it out. Very, very, very good from the Sunday edition. Extremely happy to have Taoiseach Leo Varadkar here. Really think that his leadership and political will has been what's required to push Ireland forward in a positive direction. And then we're also happy to have other speakers coming from the United States. We have Rob Prochet from the State Department who'll talk about Brexit. We have Rick Driggers from the Department of Homeland Security to talk about cybersecurity. And then all the other panelists that we have. I think we're going to have a really great slate of speakers today. So when we're talking about $1 trillion, what are we talking about here? Really, I think the economic relationship between the United States and Ireland has never been healthier. If you look, American companies employ 155,000 workers in Ireland. And if you look at the bond that they've created between these two countries, it's just amazing. You look at the importance to the tax revenue base. American companies have paid 50% of the corporate tax revenue, according to the Irish Revenue Commissioners. Also, American companies are good corporate citizens here. They are funding more than 7,000 community-based projects here in Ireland. And I spend a lot of time with them. Sitting around the table, and a lot of these faces, the vast majority are not American. They're actually Irish, and they care about Ireland Inc. and seeing this project go forward, and they care deeply about the Irish-American relationship. But this is really only half the story. Because you look at the importance of the American companies, good policies helped to get Ireland out of the financial crisis, but the fuel was the investment coming from the United States, which has doubled in the past 10 years, which is quite extraordinary. But that was really the fuel for the financial crisis. But now, let's look at the other side of the story. From where Ireland was to where it is now, Irish companies are expanding and profiting, and they're coming to the United States. We've seen Irish companies create over 100,000 jobs in the United States, in all 50 states. Really quite an extraordinary story. In the past 3 years, we've seen the rate of the growth of investment triple. So that's becoming, the two-way street is becoming a two-way superhighway now, and we're seeing both sides, the traffic, and we're seeing both sides benefit. And we're seeing jobs created. Since the president has been in office, Irish companies have created over 20,000 jobs in the United States. So we're seeing the rate accelerate. The American economy is good. It is very good right now, and Irish companies are taking advantage of that and profiting, and we could not be happier. So as we're seeing the U.S. economy prosper, it is good for certain countries. I mean, it's good for a lot of countries, but it's especially good for Ireland. When America grows, it creates tremendous opportunities for Ireland, and Ireland grows too. The Trump administration has adopted policies that have helped our economy grow. The tax cut to 21% was so critical for our economic growth and our investment in capital expenditures. It just cannot be understated. And we had the highest tax rates in the industrial world on the corporate side, and now we're in the middle. I mean, essentially, you look at Irish economic policy, and the rest of the world's copied. Ireland's been low tax for a long time, and you see corporate rates going down all across the world. I mean, good economic policy, that's the great thing about it. If you succeed with good economic policy, others follow. And I think that's what we've seen, and I think it's good for not only the United States, but it's also good for Ireland, creating incredible opportunities. But also, if you look at a side of the story maybe that's not known as much, is what's being done on regulation. So for every one regulation that's being created, 22 have been removed. And that's cutting down the red tape and making it where your companies can focus more on innovation when you're in the United States. And that is just so important. America's just a great place to do business right now. Ready access to capital, plentiful energy, skilled workforce, and a huge market of 325 million. You know, we're seeing Irish companies, there's stories being written by the likes of the Ardagh Group, CRH, Glanbia, but we're also seeing a new wave come. We're seeing Crest Solutions, Integra, Mass Aviation, and they're all profiting from their investment in the United States. Just this year, I led the largest Irish delegation over to the Select USA conference, which is focused on bringing foreign direct investment into the United States. It was an event attended by 5 cabinet secretaries who spoke to the group, 10 governors, and the Economic Development Agency of all 50 states. The group benefited. And from this conference, we've already seen 3 investments in the United States from these companies. Ireland had a bigger delegation than Spain, France, and the UK, and made quite a splash at the conference. This is a good event, and I would encourage you, if you're looking at investing in the United States, to attend next year. And also, please look to us at the U.S. Embassy. We can help. We've opened a Select USA office last year in the embassy. Who can help you when you're looking at your investments? We can open doors, we can help advise you, and we can give you a lot of value added. So if you're looking at that investment in the United States, even if you're just in the starting point, come to us, and my team can help you. We're here to do this. And Ireland is one of only 11 countries that have an office like that. And it's the smallest country that has a Select USA office. So that's something the embassy is very, very proud of. But, you know, when we're looking at the U.S. economic policy, you know, the notion of fairness is very important. You know, we're committed. The President is committed to moving to the zero principle. For a level playing field for U.S. companies and other international business. So the goal is 0 tariffs, 0 non-tariff barriers, and 0 subsidies on non-auto industrial goods. And really, we think this is something that would benefit Ireland as well, and we hope Ireland will be our partner as we try to move towards this ambitious goal. Now, before I get off stage, I have to thank all of our sponsors who helped to make this incredible event, which was supposed to be a small economic conference, but and so I'd like to thank all of them, the Ardagh Group, Barclays, Clark Hill, Johnson & Johnson, PGA European Tour, and the Independent News and Media Group who helped to sponsor this event. So really thank you, and big round of applause for their generous support. And I really have to thank the embassy team that put this together. Mark Bossy led them, did just an amazing job. So Mark, hats off to you, really good job. So bottom line, we're going to succeed together if we're going to meet this $1 trillion goal. What is a $1 trillion goal about? To me, it's about a couple things. It's about prosperity and good jobs in both the United States and Ireland. And that's what it's all about, economic prosperity for all. So with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest. You know, I met him about 2 years ago, and up-and-coming minister. And I knew from the first meeting I had with him, this guy is going places. But, you know, I was sitting in Dublin Castle a couple weeks ago. There was an international visit you might have heard of, but somebody from the Vatican had come here. And I'm sitting listening to that speech, and I thought, this is a historic speech. This man he's got his pulse on it. He is the voice of modern Ireland, and I thought it was just a tremendous speech, and I think it's one he'll be remembered for. And so, with that, please let's welcome Taoiseach Leo Varadkar to the stage.
Thank you, and good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here today in the Phoenix Park. Not just to have the opportunity to attend this conference, but there's also an added benefit, as you are, of course, in the middle of my wonderful constituency, my congressional district of Dublin West. So I got an extra half an hour in bed this morning, which was an added benefit. I'd like to particularly thank Chargé d'Affaires Rees-Smith for the invitation to speak to you today. And I think we can all agree that the future US-Ireland economic relationship is of profound importance to all of us here. So I welcome the opportunity to speak to you about it. As you know, this week US President Donald Trump had to postpone his proposed trip to Ireland. However, whenever it takes place, we look forward to the opportunity to renew the deep historic ties that exist between our two countries, ties that, of course, are cultural, economic, and are in our families as well. So many of us, including me, having US relations. When another president, and Irish-American Ronald Reagan, visited Ireland back in 1984, he predicted that our future economic success would be based, and I quote, on our shared historic regard for personal freedom. And I think he was right to recognise that too often the link between prosperity and freedom is overlooked. And as President Reagan said, it provided a firm basis for increasing cooperation between our two countries and among all countries in the globe that recognise it. 3 decades on, our economy is thriving, and so too is the relationship between our two countries. And I think in many ways that relationship is built on our shared values and our shared creed of freedom, enterprise, opportunity, and responsibility. Today, this conference allows us to take stock of where the US-Irish bilateral economic relations stand and to find ways to deepen these relations in the period ahead. Right now, there's a flow of about €2 billion in trade between Britain and the US every week, with a total value of $600 billion every year, a phenomenal sum of money. And I think it should be our aim, and indeed this is the title of this conference, to make that relationship a $1 trillion relationship in the next decade. Trade between our two countries is well balanced, with Ireland enjoying a surplus in goods and merchandise, offset by US surplus when it comes to services. And I think to understand just how much more things can grow, we need to reflect on some of the long-term trends. When President Reagan visited here in 1984, he celebrated the fact that 300 American firms employing some 40,000 people had invested in Ireland. Today, there are now 700 US companies who directly employ upwards of 150,000 people in Ireland. And I know many of those companies are represented here today. Ireland is a dynamic, competitive and open economy, an outward-looking nation confident about our future and our place in the world. And that owes much to the cumulative impact of decades of investment by your companies, especially during our recession and financial crisis when we needed it most. And it is a relationship which I believe has benefited us all. First and foremost, companies like yours with global ambition receive access to the world's largest market, the European single market, the biggest economy in the world if you take us all together, a population of nearly 500 million people. And proximity to market is vital for US firms seeking to grow, to innovate and to succeed on a global scale. And I think as the United Kingdom prepares to leave the European Union in a few months' time, the Irish-US relationship is going to become all the more important, with Ireland acting, I believe, as a bridge to the European Union for the United States. Of course, the competitiveness of your firms in global export markets has and will continue to be an important driver of sustainable economic growth and job creation in the United States. And I believe American firms share our economic vision and understand our strengths, how we provide what we call the 3 Cs: community, connectivity, and competitiveness. Community representing both talent and demographics. Ireland's demographic profile is one of the most favourable in Europe, with 40% of our population under 29 years of age. The average age in the country is 39, which is my age, so we are very much a young country. Unfortunately, next year I'll be 40, which means for the first time I'll be above the average age in the country, but that's another day's work. Beyond that, our labour force is among the best educated in the world, with more than 50% of my own generation holding a 3rd level qualification, and that's 10% above the OECD average. And of course it's rising. And we have in Ireland an enormous commitment to education. For example, it starts young. We now offer every child in the country 2 years of preschool education without charge. And I'm delighted to be joined here by Minister Catherine Sapone, the Minister for Children, who's been at the forefront of driving those changes and making sure that we invest in education from the very start, even before kids go to school. And that's where I think that investment can have its greatest return. And that continues, of course, through high school and into college and university, where we assure that no student who's from Ireland has to pay more than $4,000 in college fees every year, thus making third-level education and college education accessible to everyone, and ensuring that people don't graduate with enormous debts in the way I think many do in the United States, unfortunately. And this year, our education budget will total €10 billion, the highest ever. And it means that kids going to school in our elementary schools this September go to schools with the lowest pupil-teacher ratio ever. And that's part of our real commitment to education, because it is such an investment in the future. The second C is connectivity, and our connectivity is continuously improving to the point where we now have direct connections from Ireland to 14 US cities through Dublin, Cork and Shannon. That's about 50,000 seats a week this summer, with more routes coming on stream next year. And we also have from Ireland direct connections now to China, Africa, the Gulf, and of course all the major cities in the United Kingdom and European Union. The third is competitiveness, and Ireland's economy is very much open to international trade, with a strong pro-business environment underpinned by a competitive and transparent and stable corporate tax rate. We have a political consensus when it comes to low taxes for business, when it comes to fiscal responsibility, balancing the books, when it comes to free trade and our membership of the European Union. So the two largest parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, broadly agree on all of those issues. And that, I think, gives business an assurance that even if there were to be a change of government in the future, and there isn't going to be, by the way, but if there were to be a change of government in the future, that commitment to low taxes for business, to fiscal responsibility, to free trade, and to our European Union membership would remain. Last week, my colleague, the Minister for Finance, published Ireland's corporation tax roadmap. And that sets out Ireland's direction of travel in terms of corporation tax reform over the coming years, to ensure that our corporation tax regime continues to be transparent, sustainable and legitimate. Ireland is not a tax haven. We do not wish to be a tax haven, nor do we wish to be seen as one. And at the moment, we are in fact one of only 23 countries in the world that is fully compliant with the new international best practice as judged by the Global Forum on Tax Transparency and Exchange of Information. And we'll continue to crack down on avoidance in the years ahead. So Ireland will continue to foster our economic activity by adapting and evolving our corporate tax regime, while always remaining faithful to the commitment to keep the corporate profit tax rate at 12.5%, a rate that it has been at for decades now, notwithstanding changes in the economic cycle and changes in government. I might also mention a fourth C, one that is perhaps harder to define, and that, of course, is culture. And our culture and values are very much in line with what the United States employers are seeking. In Ireland, just as is the case in the United States, we have a can-do attitude and a creative mindset and a willingness to solve problems. We understand each other instantly. No interpretation, linguistic or cultural, is required. And I think at a time when others in Europe are looking to close their doors, Ireland is a country that is open and tolerant and diverse. Today, more than 1 in 6 of our residents were born abroad, including my own father, making us one of the most international countries in Europe. And I believe the relationship that exists between our two countries goes both ways. So let's reflect on the fact that in more recent times, the flow of transatlantic investment, as Rhys said, is increasingly two ways as well. Irish businesses now employ over 100,000 Americans across all sectors of the US economy, in cities and towns right across the United States. And this investment is increasing year on year. Last year, Enterprise Ireland client companies opened 59 new offices across the United States, bringing to almost 500 the number of Irish firms with facilities in the United States. Irish companies in the US are at the cutting edge of construction, building American homes, hospitals and neighbourhoods, ready and willing to take advantage of the administration's new commitments to investing in American infrastructure. Irish companies are among the largest food producers in the United States, and Irish companies save American lives with innovative medicines, medical devices, and healthcare services. And Irish companies protect American citizens and American businesses by delivering innovative, market-leading security solutions. So I think continued strong growth in the US economy has to be welcome news for Irish companies, which continue to explore new opportunities for trade, investment and job creation in the United States. It is a broadly balanced relationship, though the US does enjoy an overall surplus. And it's also a dynamic relationship, one that's continuously changing and evolving, and therefore cannot be taken for granted. And Ireland and the US must continuously look for new opportunities to renew and expand our economic ties. Although very much on the geographic periphery of Europe, Ireland's future is unquestionably at the heart of the common European home, which we helped to build. Together, the European Union and the United States account for half of the world's GDP, over half of the world's foreign direct investment, and a third of its trade flows. And I believe the strategic partnership between the US and the EU is indispensable for the prosperity and security of citizens on both sides of the Atlantic. Whether we like it or not, global economic and military power is shifting to the global south and global east, and will continue to do so. So I think this Atlantic partnership between the US and the EU becomes more important into the future, and is not something that we can take for granted. It's something we need to protect and nurture and develop. As in any long-standing relationship, there will of course be tensions to manage and challenges to resolve, and manage them and resolve them we will. Ireland strongly welcomes the agreement reached by President Trump and President Juncker in July to launch a new phase in transatlantic relations and to break the cycle of tariffs and counter-tariffs which threatened our prosperity. In our view, no other bilateral partnership in the world has a better capacity to respond to the challenges of rapidly changing global environments than our one. And the EU is fully committed to a strong partnership with the US, and Ireland is fully committed to playing our instrumental role in fostering and developing this relationship in the years ahead. Colleagues, before I conclude, I'd like to commend Rhys for his extraordinary efforts to learn and promote the Irish language in this Bliain na Gaeilge, the year of the Irish language. So gorgeous, great Rhys, Mahu. We're all extremely impressed. I'm not sure any ambassador has made such a Trojan effort in the past to do what you've done. And I expect that as you've journeyed through Connemara and through Gweedore in the beautiful county of Donegal, you'll have heard that proverb, that Irish seanachal, Ninartgar Lachéile, which translates roughly like this: there is no strength without unity. And the United States and Ireland have deep and lasting ties. And I think from that, we should take strength from our shared values and history and exciting future together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach Varadkar. Unfortunately, the Taoiseach has to leave for his next announcement, but we want to take this opportunity to thank him and his wonderful staff, Mary and Cahill, for facilitating his presence here. Taoiseach, thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the stage the chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Mr. Kevin Hassett and a moderated conversation with Ms. Derville McDonald, the group business editor of the Independent newspapers.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
I won't speak too much Irish because it's Ulster Irish and you wouldn't understand anyway. Yeah, it's great to be back in Deerfield during one of the more quieter weeks in the US-Ireland relationship. It was Virginia Woolf who said that for most of history, Anonymous was a woman. For most of last week, the guest to my right, who is by no means anonymous, has been clarifying when asked that he is not the anonymous op-ed writer in the New York Times.
I would like to add, though, that Anonymous is still my favorite composer. Anonymous has this amazing range. Check it out, actually.
You think it's a fraud, though, do you?
I do think it is a fraud, yes.
Yeah, and
I work in the White House every day. I talk with the president often, even on the phone here while I've been in Ireland. And the person described in the New York Times is just not the president that I know. And I can tell you that the morale in the White House is tremendously high, that we've got a bunch of folks that like working with each other, that have each other's backs. I think that the soap opera, as portrayed in the media, is an attempt to really undermine the authority of the president, and it's just not accurate reporting. I think that, I don't know who made it up, but it feels to me like it's made up.
Well, I would love to sit and spend the next 20 minutes talking to you about the great DC whodunit and all the various political things, but I won't, because the focus today is on the US economy and what it means for Ireland. And, the question of to what extent the economic growth can be attributed to Donald Trump and to his reforms is something that's going to loom large as the midterm elections approach. But to what extent is the economic growth we are seeing in the US the continuation of long-running trends, a strengthening of the economy? Is it due to Donald Trump and his agenda, or are we entering into sort of animal spirits territory?
As you know, this, by the way, is the most famous journalist in Ireland I've discovered. Really? This is prepared for this, and also the toughest interviewer. So she was in some sense throwing me the alley-oop, if you know the basketball play, because she knows that I did a lot of work on it. It's a very kind question, thank you. Which means the next 5 questions are going to be really terrible for me. But the fact is that if you look at the data, I made a case doing the press conference at the White House on Monday that the data overwhelmingly support the view that there was a massive change in the trend of economic growth in the United States that was associated with the election of Donald Trump. And I pointed out as an academic economist, and I believe correctly, that economic historians will not dispute that the trend break occurred then. When I took over as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, everybody said that we had entered a period of secular stagnation and that we would never be able to grow 3% again. The latest quarter we had growth that now is going to revise up to, I think, 4.5%. And third quarter is looking to be quite similar. We've got a capital spending boom because of our tax cuts and so on. And so I think that economists like to argue, and for sure they're going to argue about why the trends all flipped. But I think that the question of whether there was a fundamental shift in the underlying trend of the U.S. economy when President Trump was elected is not in dispute. And if you're someone who wants to assert that the current growth rate is just a consistent, it's just a run along the path that was inherited by President Trump, then I classify you in with the science deniers that just stop doing science and have positions about things.
Well, then where was the turning point? When was the changing point? If you look at the last 19 months of the Obama administration, kind of creating 190,000 jobs a month, you're looking at a great rate at the minute of just over 200,000. So what was the definitive point? Is it the tax?
I told you the questions are going to get tougher, right?
I told you he'd try and undermine me. Did I tell you that? Go.
So the turning point in the data really happened right about at the election. Economic activity is forward-looking. Regulations under President Obama grew about 8% a year. We had the highest corporate tax on earth. The capital spending in the United States actually declined in 2016, while GDP growth was 1.6%. This year, capital spending is looking like it's already this year is up 10%. and economic growth is in the 4s. And so I think
How
that
long
it happened.
is it gonna last?
Yeah, I'll get to that. But it happened basically right about when the president was elected. But you rightly point out that job growth per month has been about 200,000 jobs, and it was under President Obama, and it is for President Trump. But the interesting thing is that when we wrote down our first forecast for 3% growth for 2017, or actually for 2018 was the first year that we had at 3% growth, then we were ridiculed by Democratic economists because they said, well, you could never get growth like that because there are no workers left because the economy is at full employment. And so they all forecasted that job growth would drop from 200,000 to down around 100,000 per month. And of course, that hasn't happened because so many people who were disconnected from society, who didn't have a job, who were discouraged by the President Obama economy, re-entered and got a job. And so the job creation stayed steady at a time when the left-wing economists were saying it was going to collapse. And so, but it's interesting, though, that the only fact that they have where there's not a clear trend break is the job creation per month, which is the thing that they predicted a trend break in that didn't happen. And so, again, I think that you have to be a science denier to not accept the view that something very unexpected happened when President Trump was elected.
Okay, we're going to talk about racing towards $1 trillion in terms of the US-Ireland economic relationship, but US economy is racing towards $1 trillion 2 years ahead of schedule for another thing, and that is your deficit. The Congressional Budget Office, out this week talking about the cost over the next 10 to 11 years of the capital spending and of the cornerstone, the key reform of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Is there a risk that the gains that you are articulating now will be eroded over time by the cost of this, which some would say is a giveaway for the wealthy, whilst there's wage stagnation for those at the other end?
What does this word schedule mean? I'm sorry, it's schedule, right? Schedule. I think the fact is that the deficit is a serious problem in the U.S., and it's a serious long-run problem especially. That if you include entitlements that are promised but not funded, then the U.S. is probably in present value short something like $100 trillion. And I think that economists on the left and the right have forever and ever said that we have to make our budget situation more sustainable than it is. I think that the challenge, though, is that President Trump came into office and he saw two things. One was an economy that everybody told us had a new normal where you couldn't grow above really 1% ever again. And he thought that we were stuck in that new normal because of really crazy, stupid policies like the highest corporate tax on earth that chased business overseas, and he changed it. Another thing that President Trump saw was a military that had been allowed to kind of rot on the vine a little bit. If you saw like the readiness statistics for our airplanes, half of them couldn't fly, and the boats were rusty because they weren't even paying for paint for the Navy ships and so on. And so there had to be a big increase in military spending as well because there was stuff to fix.
What about those Republicans?
But the deficit is absolutely an issue that has to be
And what about the Republicans who were
addressed.
up in arms during the last administration over the debt ceiling and the deficit? Where are they now, and where do they go when you're when you're well over $1 trillion into a deficit? Where do they go in politically now?
Well, I think there's one other thing about the deficit, and then I'm going to come to your question. I'm not dodging. Is that you also have to look at.
Oh, you won't get away with it.
I know. Although that's a challenge. I think. I got to go.
No.
But there's also that when you're looking at the economic consequences of your policies and the deficit impact, then there's a difference between the primary deficit, which is just the deficit on revenues and spending, and the part that's attributable to interest payments. And so one of the reasons why the deficit has gone up lately is that the interest rates have gone up as the Fed has normalized policy. And we, of course, respect the independence of the Fed. But I think that it absolutely is the case that deficit or fiscal consolidation is the way economists talk about it, is something that will have to be on the agenda, and it will have to be on the agenda soon. But I think that President Trump was correct to prioritize really the sort of massive problems that we had as a country. I think that the idea that the new normal was this exogenous thing that wouldn't respond to policy has been refuted by the tax bill that we just passed and the deregulation that we've engaged in. And so I don't think that the deficit has taken a turn in the wrong direction. But think about it this way. The average growth that people expected that we'd be seeing would be 2% over the next 10 years when we took office. And now even private forecasters are saying, well, the next few years are going to be north of 3. We still think that the average over the next 10 years is going to be about 3%. So if you have 3% growth instead of 2% growth, that means that GDP is going to be 10% higher about after 10 years than you thought. Right now, the Congressional Budget Office says that GDP in the 10th year, their outlook is going to be $28 trillion. $28 trillion. So if you're 10% higher than that, then that means that you've got, almost $3 trillion more GDP than you would have otherwise.
Okay, but
and so that $3 trillion of GDP, last thought, 20% of GDP is always revenue. That gives you, in that last year, $600 billion worth more of revenue. And so growth can have a big effect on this.
It can. And look, economies and the global economy is not down to one individual or even one country. America's certainly become more protectionist in its outlook. A strange dichotomy in America where business sentiment is extremely high, but bodies like the US Chamber of Commerce are saying tariffs are not the way to go. And if we're looking at the sentiment certainly seems to have gone down a little bit in sense of a trade war, but is imposing tariffs on imported goods, starting trade wars, is that not going to hurt US businesses and consumers?
I think what's going to help US citizens and consumers and Irish citizens and consumers is the president's commitment to reciprocal trade deals that reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers and even have an objective of taking everything to zero. And one of the things I can say that surprised me the most as an economist who wasn't a trade economist when I started at the White House about 15 months ago was we went to this meeting right at the beginning in the Roosevelt Room where we just had a presentation about the asymmetries of our trade deals and how it was really easy for people to ship into the U.S., but often really, really hard for U.S. firms to ship into other countries. And then we actually went through the quotes of previous administrations about how unacceptable the trade deals are because of these asymmetries, how disadvantaged U.S. firms are. And then we were briefed on how the trade representative for President Clinton and the trade representative for President Obama and the trade representative for President Bush, how they made their top objective to fix this, and they failed. And President Trump has decided that it's imperative that we fix it. The OECD put out a study recently that showed that if the U.S. is successful, that it's going to add something a little less than 0.5% to global GDP growth, and that is, his approach is one that requires that he stand up for America. And so I could say that if people don't agree to the very reasonable assertion that we should have fair trade deals that are reciprocal, so you treat us the way we treat you, and they continue to disadvantage us, then it's going to be bad for them.
Well, let's move on to the US and Ireland, and I will talk about separately how we have been placed in a basket of countries that have been targeted over the trade surplus, which has sort of been disputed to some extent by the Irish side. But there are a lot of people in this room who will be wondering what the cornerstone of the reforms, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, will mean for jobs, investment and decisions here in Ireland. And thank you for the headline in the Sunday Independent last week when you said that the reforms wouldn't lead to Trump sucking factories out of Ireland. But there is a question over... It
was funny because it was like below the fold, and so the top part said something like Trump won't suck.
We're very good.
And then you flip down and it says jobs out of the country. But I thought the article about me, the headline being Trump won't suck, I guess,
we do like to grab our readers' attentions, but whatever about the and the Taoiseach and Rees have spoken all about, the existing relationships. There was a frisson, there was a sense of people stalling decisions both before and after this big reform came in, wondering what does it mean for the future US-Ireland trade relationship? Because you can't on the one hand say we're bringing IP back, we're bringing manufacturing back, we're bringing jobs back under an America First agenda and not expect it to have, and I know it's not an Ireland-specific agenda, but that it's not to expect it to have some sort of repercussions, perhaps not in the immediate term, but certainly maybe even 5 or 10 years down the line. So what do you say to a room here who are from those companies, advising those companies, investing in them? What you say we've nothing to fear, but you can't have it both ways.
Okay, so I can have it both ways, and in the following sense. That first, let's look at all of our policies, and let's accept the null hypothesis for a moment that I'm right, and that we can grow at 3% instead of 2% for the next decade in the U.S. We have this econometric model that we've developed at CEA that estimates something that finance professionals call the beta, but it's basically the responsiveness of GDP in Ireland to GDP in the U.S. And if beta is 2, then that means if our growth rate goes up by 1%, then the Irish growth rate goes up by 2%. If it were half, then you'd get 0.5% of growth out of our 1% growth. And the beta for Ireland is the highest one we've estimated. And I guess I was at an off-the-record discussion with government officials, so I can't say who. But when I talked about how we do this, then some other professionals in the Irish government said, oh, we've estimated that too. And they got about the same answer we do, which is it's 1.5. And so if you accept that we've made the U.S. economy grow 3 instead of 2, then think about, that means that GDP in Ireland, if you get a normal effect, would be 10 to 15% higher a decade from now than it would otherwise be. And I think that there's a heck of a lot of room for sort of transitional stress while we work out our trade differences in that space if you're getting that much extra
And you've
GDP.
segued nicely into what you delicately describe as our trade differences. You were much stronger last year when you spoke to Marketplace about Ireland, in which you mentioned us in the same breath as the phrase tax haven. One of the things you were critical about that time, Kevin,
but I like tax havens. It's a compliment for me. I wish I could be a tax haven.
But you kind of say it's something that we take as a great thing. We say yes, 10% of our employment here is created by US multinationals, and you were saying no. Look, 10%. Money is going there willy-nilly, I think was the phrase that you said. And you also said, look, there's bloated profits in those subsidiaries that's coming back to us as income tax. And I think you channeled your inner limerickness by lowering the tone somewhat when we spoke last week, saying, well, we're not really. And tax haven's a bit of a loaded word. And you think that the trade deficit, which has been identified by your government, we put into a basket of other companies over our chronic, as you describe it, trade surplus. But you think there's a simple solution to that over time in the form of transfer pricing?
Yeah, and let me be clear about this too, because I think that President Trump and congressional leaders 100% deserve the lion's share of the credit for the tax reform in the U.S. that is so improving the lives of Americans. But I think that if we made the list of other places and people that deserve credit, that you'd have to put Ireland. Because Ireland, against really the kind of left-wing, socialist-leaning European model, decided that they rejected the sort of Marxian view that capital and labor are at war with one another, and that they were going to become an attractive place for capital, and that would be good for the workers, not just for the rich people of Ireland. And they've showed that it was true. They demonstrated it. And so I spent my career playing with the data, publishing the academic papers in top journals, documenting the astonishing success of really the Irish miracle, going from the poorest country in Europe to about the richest. And you did it basically by recognizing that it's like the Marxian story. The capital and labor are opposed to one another is just incorrect. And so, I think we wouldn't have had a tax bill without you guys, and that because we could point to how successful you were, and that now that we have a much more reasonable corporate tax, then what's going to happen is that the advantage of going through Ireland with future activity is smaller. There's still lots of advantages because of other things besides taxes attract one to Ireland, but it's true that you set up a system where U.S. multinationals.
You say that's going to iron out over time,
right? And this is the thing that I think is the most important thing to make clear, that under the old U.S., it's not Ireland's fault that the tax law in the U.S. was written by somebody who was like taking acid before they wrote it or something. I mean, it just made no sense whatsoever what they were doing. But this is the system that we had. So suppose that I had the Hassett. I actually looked up before I came. There's a Irish company called Hassett Nut and Bolt. And so suppose that Hassett Nut and Bolt was my company, and I'd been operating it in the U.S. Forever and ever. And then all of a sudden I got this great idea to keep the headquarters in the U.S. but to move my factory to Ireland. Well, under the old code, what would happen would be I'd make my nuts and bolts in Limerick, I guess that's where Hassett Nut and Bolt is, and I would sell them in the U.S., and I would have the parent buy, say, a nut and a bolt that costs $10 for $15, and then sell it in the U.S. for, say, $10. And so then the Irish sub would be making a $5 profit on every nut and bolt pair, and the U.S. parent would be losing money. And so the point is that by doing that, if they sold it for less than $10, especially losing money, then what would happen would be the U.S. firm could take the tax loss that the parent posted in the U.S. and get refunded past taxes. And so the tax refund on previous taxes paid could build the factory in Ireland. And then once the money was left in Ireland, it avoided U.S. tax. And so the U.S. taxpayers had set up a system where you'd have to be a lunatic company not to move your activity to Ireland and other countries that were attractive. And they actually paid companies to do it with tax refunds. And so it was just crazy. So, again, the president's political opponents said, no, capital spending's negative and GDP growth's in the ones because, like, the Martians have given us secular stagnation. And we said, no, there's this ridiculous policy that if we fix it, we'll fix our country. And I'd say the early returns are looking pretty good for us.
So I think with tax reforms, it's going to take some time to see how it plans out. And you always have the risk that those reforms can be changed by the next or subsequent administrations. I'm going to ask you two more questions, even though Mark says one, but two. The first is this. Earlier today, writing in the Irish Independent, Rees said that the US stands with Ireland in opposing what he described as ill-conceived plans to place additional taxes on digital companies. And this is obviously a critical issue for Ireland, a game changer for Ireland, given the preponderance of tech companies and that high-level, high-service, high-value companies here. Do you see the EU digital services tax, rightly or wrongly, as a tax on the US, a tax on US companies? Are they being singled out? Is it unfair? And how would the US retaliate or deal with it?
I think I understand that there are multiple things going on, and some of it involves European antitrust law, and we, of course, respect the rule of law. But I do think that the history of such things has often been that US firms that are successful are singled out. And I think it's actually a nice place to sort of finish our conversation because, we haven't talked... I have
one more question.
You have one more question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not getting away that
I'm not
easily.
getting away. But okay, to almost finish our conversation. But we haven't talked about Brexit, and of course we're very hopeful that all of our partners, work it out successfully. But I think that one thing that has become very clear to me in my visit here to Dublin in the last few days is that I believe that the very strong partnership between Ireland and the U.S. is going to even strengthen in the years to come. Because for so long the UK and Ireland were often the voices of reason when the more left-wing countries in the EU were deciding to swashbuckle and go after US and other companies, and you were kind of the voice of reason. And I think that there's an extra and important, globally important responsibility for Ireland in the future.
On that, Kevin, the kind of the voice of reason and standing together. When we spoke last week, you talked about how Ireland was kind of quite different or quite special within an EU context. And I want to just ask you, what is the importance of the strategic relationship and the alliance between Ireland and the US? There are going to be lots of different challenges coming down the track, tax and regulation, all sorts of challenges. And sometimes the Ireland-US relationship, we can suffer from being a little bit too special or exceptional. But how can Ireland and the US stand together against these bigger reforms, including the digital services tax coming down the line? And what can Irish companies do to maximise, in this totally new environment, the relationship between both countries?
Well, I think we're already doing that, and our bilateral meetings here this week have made an enormous amount of progress. And I think that ultimately, in the digital space, what's going to have to happen is that a lot of original thinking is have to go on to actually carefully define the problems and then carefully craft the solutions once we all agree about what the problems are. And I think that with digital taxes, there's some countries that are trying to rush ahead of that process and throw out solutions before we've defined the problems. And I think that the U.S. and Ireland agree that would be premature, that we need to, use the OECD to study the matter and to come up with standards for countries in this place. And so anyway, so that's how I think it's going to alter.
And finally, if you're not anonymous, who is?
Oh, if I'm not anonymous, who is? Yeah, I really don't speculate.
We'll
You know,
talk about that,
but I'll just okay. That was one after the last question, by the way. Just
I know. And
right.
Mark Watts is going to kill me.
Yeah, it's okay though, because I got to answer the question. So the first thing is
a world exclusive. We're going to find out who anonymous is.
There are three types of economists: those who can count and those who can't. So therefore, I don't know how many questions you've been at, but I think that the truth is that the job. And the Taoiseach could tell you too that the job of governing is an incredible responsibility and a great privilege. That serving my country has been the most magical time of my life. And my uncle and my father served in the service, and my Uncle Byrne was a paratrooper in the Second World War, whose first deployment when he was about 18 years old was Bastogne. And at one point, there were paratroopers. They were told to take a village that was held by German armor, and they failed at the beginning because they ran out of ammo, and it was guys with rifles going after armor. And they decided to have a bayonet charge. This really happened. The 513th Regiment in the 17th Airborne Division, go Google it. And they bayonet charged the village. 2 Medal of Honor winners were in that group, and they captured the village held by armor and all these guys who still had ammo, and they did it with bayonets. And when I think about the service of, Irish soldiers, Irish American soldiers like my family, and what they've done because they love their country, then it makes it kind of ridiculous to wonder whether I can have the New York Times make fun of me to serve the country, because it's such a small sacrifice. And it's really been a pleasure to be up here and talk to you, and to talk to you on the phone. And I thank you all.
Explaining my piece last Sunday that the origins of Hassett in the Irish language means discord or strife, but it's been impossible to do so. On your behalf, please give a warm Gurmaigav to Kevin Hassett. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
Well, far be it from me to separate Derval from her last question or four. We want to thank Derval McDonald. Thank you very much for moderating our discussion. And to Kevin Hassett and his team, who unfortunately are on their way to the airport right now, catching a flight. So again, round of applause. Thank you, Derval and Kevin Hassett. As the Monty Python crew said, and now for something completely different, it's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Mr. Ian Massingham, the Chief Evangelist for Amazon Web Services.
Thank you. So first thing that I have to do in any event, of course, is explain my weird job title. So I'll do that first of all. Who here has any kind of background in software or technology? Wow, that's a lot more than is typical for events of this type. At AWS, we have two motions that we use to acquire new customers, and I'll talk a lot more about what AWS is in a second, but we have two mechanisms that we use to acquire new customers. The first is a very traditional enterprise C-level to C-level sales approach, which is super common in technology businesses. But the second characteristic of our business is that we also have a direct-to-software developer offering where technologists can pick up and use our services autonomously. They can self-serve with the technology that they need to use to build products or operate systems. And my role and the role of my team is to encourage software developers to do that by winning mindshare and building awareness with these technologists about a different way of building technology products. So it's a kind of odd job title, but when you think about it in the context of trying to encourage a large audience all over the world to do something, it's kind of similar to, I won't say religion, but kind of similar to evangelism. So that's the reason for the slightly unusual job title. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about AI and machine learning later in this session. But first of all, I want to just quickly introduce Amazon Web Services. And I also want to talk a little bit about Amazon Web Services and some of our customers in the context of the relationship between businesses here in Ireland and, of course, businesses here in the US, which is, of course, the broader context for this event. And to do that, I'll just tell you a quick story about how AWS got started, how we've scaled, and then I'll try and illustrate how important Ireland and Dublin is to Amazon Web Services customers, not only here in Ireland, but Amazon Web Services customers all over the globe, actually. So we started this business back in 2006, and Amazon had been around for quite a while at that point. 2006, we released some services that were intended to make it easier for software developers to do the things that I've already talked about, to build better technology products by giving them freer access to the kind of resources that they needed in order to do that. And this was an experiment for Amazon. You probably heard about experimentation culture within Amazon and how important that is to identifying new business opportunities, proving their validity and moving forward to scale them. And AWS was one of these experiments. At day one, we genuinely had no idea whether or not customers would choose to adopt these new types of services that we were creating. Now, it turned out they were pretty popular, okay? And over the course of the last more than 10 years now, we've acquired millions of customers that are using these services today. And unlike a lot of traditional technology providers, there is very little to zero lock-in to these services. So customers can move away from AWS, from Amazon Web Services, at pretty much any point, just by changing the way in which their software is built or by moving their applications or systems somewhere else. So it's merit-based growth from zero to millions of customers over a very short space of time. Can you give me my next slide? That has obviously been reflected in the financial performance of Amazon Web Services as a standalone business unit within Amazon.com as a whole. It's one of the fastest growing technology companies ever. In fact, it's the fastest ever to reach $10 billion a year in annual revenue run rate. And we're growing today, actually at a faster rate than we were growing last year, at 49% year on year, and we hit $22 billion of annual run rate revenue in the second quarter of this year when we reported our results. So this success amongst customers in terms of adoption, well, it's been matched by success at the corporate level within the organization as well. Can you give me my next slide? So what is the services that we provide? What is the platform that we operate? There are just too many to talk through in a session like this. We have well over 125 different services. We started with basic primitives for running applications and storing data in the cloud, but today we have all kinds of different components, from the technology that you need to build IoT applications, say you're building a connected car, or you want to build an innovative home automation product, or you want to automate a manufacturing facility. We have service components for that, right the way through to advanced services for artificial intelligence and machine learning, which I'm going to return to at the end of this session. And these services have been built iteratively over this 10 to 12 year period by doing one thing and doing it repeatedly, which is to listen very, very carefully to the needs of customers and prospective customers and work backwards from those needs, from those use case requirements, from the problems that customers are trying to solve in order to build products that solve specific problems or are well suited for a particular problem category. Okay, so we're trying to listen both directly to the specific feedback of customers, but also we're trying to synthesize, find the midpoint of broad scale and diverse customer feedback that we get, and build specific services that hit the midpoint of a whole cluster of different needs that customers may have. And this working backwards takes many different forms, but one of the earliest examples of this actually is what drove us to come here to Dublin, Ireland in 2009 with our second infrastructure region. Now, an infrastructure region is a group of AWS-operated data center facilities. So we're talking about very large buildings that are filled with technology, connected to very high-performance networks, within which customers can create all of the different kinds of services that we offer. And Dublin, Ireland was the second location globally where we built one of these infrastructure footprints as far back as 2009. It was actually our first location outside of the US. And that was really in response to the demand from customers here in Ireland and across the broader European region to take advantage of the kind of services that we offer. If you play games online or your children play games online, you'll know about the effect of latency on applications. If you're playing in a different region, you'll get beaten every single time because your performance against that application is not as good as the people that you're competing against. And this same effect is prevalent in business applications. It's particularly prevalent in finance applications. And it also manifests itself in the user experience that you have when you do things like access a web or mobile app. If it feels sluggish or unresponsive, there's a good chance that it's been served from some location on the internet, which is just a long way away from you. Okay, so by taking our infrastructure out around the globe, we can assure customers of better performance. We can also place our physical centers and therefore allow customers to place their data in specific locations. And those specific locations might have different legislative and regulatory regimes that protect them. So we can help customers meet data sovereignty requirements that might be met only by locating data, for example, within the EU. Okay, and this same process has led us to build out 18 of these infrastructure regions over the course of the last 12 or so years. We have 4 more in the pipeline, by the way, including 1 more within the EU in Sweden, which will come in the reasonably near future, which you can see on this map here with this green dot. But it's not only infrastructure that we have here in Dublin, in Ireland. We also have people. We have a very large engineering, support and development centre grouping here now. It's on Burlington Road in the city. And in June this year, we announced that we're going to more or less double the number of staff that we have here in Ireland over the course of the next 2 years, adding about 1,000 roles. And these are highly skilled roles in technical support and in engineering across a variety of different disciplines, from data management through to machine learning and analytics. So we have a really substantial staffing hub here in Dublin, Ireland, with great access to talent, the great education characteristics that are present here in the market. And we don't just serve customers here in Ireland or even just here in the EMEA region from this location. If you're an IT operations professional or a developer working in a bank in Southeast Asia and you pick up the phone to talk to Amazon Web Services at the right time of the day, there's every likelihood that you'll hear an Irish accent on the other end of that phone supporting you from our centres here in Dublin. So it's part of our Follow the Sun support operation that makes sure that our customers globally are adequately supported to make sure their technology is continuously operating with the characteristics that they need. Now, we're going to hear more about cybersecurity and the threat in the information security domain later on in one of the breakouts this afternoon. But of course, information security is a key criteria. At Amazon Web Services, we make a software engineering joke about this. It might not be a joke if you're not in software engineering. But we always describe security as job zero, because you'll know that all computer programmers start counting at 0, not at 1. So this is the first thing that we do before we launch any service. And it's a top priority for us because it's a top priority for customers. It's also our #1 global area of investment. We spend more money on assuring information security for our customers than we do on any other single activity within AWS. Okay, so it's a really important area for us. We have many services that are intended to help customers meet compliance and security needs that they may have. The other really important characteristic of the cloud, which I kind of talked about a little bit earlier when I was talking about my role, is breaking down barriers for access. Okay, so making the resources that innovators, that product builders, that software engineers, that business analysis professionals, and ultimately machine learning scientists and developers need much, much more accessible. Okay, this is something that we've done both within Amazon and also for many, many of the customers that use our services. And an area where this manifests itself really substantially within the Amazon Consumer Products organization is in new innovations with AI and machine learning. Really important area for Amazon, something that we've been doing for a long time, and something that is naturally, it's computationally intensive, so it requires a lot of processing horsepower to deliver good results quickly. It's also an extremely data-intensive activity. So if we want to train machine learning models, the models that we use in software for making predictions about the real world based on data, we're using a lot of data for that. Okay, it can be hundreds of millions of images, hundreds of millions or billions of user interactions. We might feed that into a large-scale processing farm, make calculations about that data, those samples that we already have, and from that we're able to make sometimes apparently magical predictions about the real world. Just a few examples of things that we're doing more broadly across Amazon by using this kind of technology. The first is the Amazon Echo, product that you can speak to. Just capable of understanding not only what you've said, but also what you mean. Okay, and there's a lot of nuance in those two things. They're subtly different. How many different ways can I express a need to find out about flight information from Dublin to New York? There are hundreds of thousands of ways in which I can construct a sentence which means more or less the same thing, okay, by using different phraseology, different synonyms, different terms, by enriching or not enriching that request with varying amounts of data. And in natural language understanding, we want to provide a human-like user experience. So we don't have to re-elicit the day on which you want to fly if you've already told us you want to fly on Thursday. A lot of complexity, as is often the case, in creating something that is intended to be incredibly simple for customers to use. Okay, a great example of machine learning at work within Amazon more broadly. Another great example, much, much less visible to customers, would be something like this Amazon robotics system that you can see here, bottom right on this slide. This is an autonomous, self-navigating materials handling system. It knows where inventory is in one of our giant fulfillment centers. It will pick it and bring it to a human being so that they can remove it from a carrier and place it onto a dispatch box to be dispatched out to a customer. Because whoever wants to receive a package more slowly, less accurately, and pay more for the privilege of having that product. Because we're all about driving efficiency into the core of what we do for all of our customers using this kind of technology. Now, it's an area of interest for Amazon Web Services, of course, and something that we've invested a lot into. And our goal here is to make this kind of capability, make these kinds of features available for all software developers, available for all data engineers, and also available in research for individuals that really want to get started experimenting with these kinds of applications. It's a big area of focus for us, and one that we're going to be staffing our centre here in Dublin with additional team members to help us build products and support customers around over the future. Okay, before I close, I just want to talk about a few customers, examples of organizations that are using AWS here in Dublin, here in Ireland, that draw links between the US and Ireland, of course. A great example of this would be an organization like Aon, Aon Benfield Securities. They have an advanced analytics center here in Dublin, which I staff with really expert machine learning, data engineering, and data scientist team members. They're operating on systems that are distributed globally using the AWS global infrastructure that I talked about, and they're delivering high-value analysis products into the rest of Aon using software development techniques and deploying these applications into the AWS cloud. Great example of a financial company customer that is using AWS here in Dublin to build applications that are really valuable for them. At the other end of the spectrum, you can consider startups like Slack, like Intercom, or gaming companies like Riot Games, all headquartered in the US, all building large-scale engineering and delivery centers here in Dublin, and all using AWS to serve customers globally from a combination of centers here and in the US. If you want to know more about anything that I've talked about here today, you can find me on Twitter at IanM with 4 M's. The obvious backstory here is that Ian MM, and Ian MMM, well, they was late to Twitter and they'd already gone, so you'll have to remember, it's 4 M's. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the plenary session of today's conference. We'll now move into the breakout sessions. Just a couple of logistic issues. You all should have received a program on the table. We're going to ask that folks take maybe 5 minutes. We will have a networking coffee break after the first breakout session. So we ask you to move to either Marquee 1, where we will have U.S. views on Brexit, or Marquee 2 over to the right as you exit to invest, grow, succeed in America. Thank you very much. Well, we will convene back here for lunch. So have a great rest of the conference. We'll see you back here. Thank you.
you call my name when you walk away. I said la 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 la.